In 1992, when I was 33 years old, I interrogated a Bigfoot, not questioned, not interviewed. Interrogated as in a formal FBI interrogation of a suspect in federal custody. What it told me about humanity, about our true nature and our future, was so disturbing that the information was immediately classified. At the highest levels, I've kept that secret for 33 years. But I'm old now, and some truths need to be told before they die with the people who know them. My name is Daniel Cross. In September 1992, I was a senior special agent assigned to the Behavioral Science Unit at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. I'd spent the previous 8 years profiling serial killers, studying criminal psychology, and teaching interview techniques to new agents. I was good at reading people, at understanding what made them tick, at getting them to talk when they didn't want to. That's why they called me when the National Guard brought in something that shouldn't exist. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on September 18th, 1992. I remember because I was watching the tail end of The Tonight Show when my pager went off. The number displayed was one I'd never seen before, a Washington, D.C. area code, followed by an extension that suggested either the Pentagon or somewhere equally serious. When I called back from the secure line at my home office, a voice I didn't recognize told me to be at Quantico's North Gate in 45 minutes. No explanation, just coordinates for a facility I'd never heard of. I dressed quickly, in standard bureau attire, dark suit, white shirt, conservative tie, and drove through the pre-dawn darkness of Northern Virginia, past familiar landmarks that suddenly felt foreign. At Quantico's North Gate, 2 men in civilian clothes but military bearing checked my credentials 3 times before directing me to follow their Humvee. We drove deep into the restricted training areas, past the firearms ranges and tactical villages, into sections of the base I'd never accessed in my 5 years stationed there. Finally, we descended into what appeared to be a maintenance entrance, but was actually an elevator shaft leading to an underground facility. The complex below was something out of a Cold War thriller, concrete corridors lit by harsh fluorescent tubes, armed guards every 50 feet, air that had that recycled quality you get in submarines or bunkers. We walked for what felt like 10 minutes before arriving at a conference room where 12 people were already gathered around a metal table covered with photographs, documents, and what looked like biological samples in sealed containers. That's where I met Dr. Sarah Martinez, a biologist from Johns Hopkins with previous work at MIT. She was maybe 40, sharp-eyed, and clearly exhausted. Next to her sat a U.S. Army colonel whose nameplate read Hendricks, 2 scientists from what I later learned was DARPA, 3 more military officers, and several people in suits who never introduced themselves, but had that particular stillness that suggested CIA. Agent Cross, Dr. Martinez said without preamble. 3 nights ago, a National Guard unit conducting night maneuvers in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state detected an anomalous heat signature during a routine thermal imaging exercise. They tracked it for 6 hours before surrounding and containing what they initially thought was a fugitive, or perhaps a bear. She slid a photograph across the table. Even now, 33 years later, I can see that image perfectly. It showed a creature approximately 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark, reddish-brown hair, with a face that was simultaneously human and utterly alien. The bone structure was massive, a pronounced brow ridge, a flat nose, a jaw that looked capable of crushing bone. But the eyes, God, the eyes were looking directly at the camera with an expression I'd seen hundreds of times in interview rooms, calculation mixed with fear. It didn't run, Colonel Hendricks said. When they had it surrounded, it raised its hands and knelt down like it understood what was happening, like it was surrendering. The room felt smaller suddenly. I looked at the other photographs spread across the table, footprints measuring 17 inches long, hair samples under microscopes, dental impressions showing teeth adapted for an omnivorous diet, measurements indicating the creature weighed approximately 650 pounds of what appeared to be almost pure muscle. "You brought me here to interrogate a Bigfoot," I said. "It wasn't a question. We brought you here because in 3 days of captivity, this specimen has demonstrated clear intelligence," Dr. Martinez replied. "It responds to spoken commands. It shows problem-solving abilities. Yesterday, it used sticks to draw geometric patterns in the dirt of its holding cell, Agent Cross. This isn't just a large primate. This is something that thinks." One of the DARPA scientists, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. "The military wants to conduct a full anatomical study." "That's a euphemism," Dr. Martinez said flatly. "They want to put it on an examination table and open it up to see what makes it tick. We have a week to prove it's worth more alive than dead." I heard the desperation in her voice. "If you can establish communication, if you can demonstrate that this creature has language, has culture, has personhood, then maybe we can convince them to let us study it long-term instead of—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Where is it now?" I asked. "Holding cell D7, 20 feet by 20 feet reinforced concrete, observation cameras, climate controlled. We've been feeding it fruits, vegetables, some meat. It eats everything. It drinks water. It sleeps. This morning it tried to speak. That got everyone's attention." Colonel Hendricks shifted uncomfortably. "What did it say?" I asked. "We're not sure. The vocalization was almost human, like someone with severe damage to their vocal cords trying to form words. But the intent was clear. It was trying to communicate." I stood up. "I need to see it now." They led me through more corridors, down another level, past security checkpoints that required retinal scans and badge combinations. The holding area was essentially a modern prison block, but instead of cells full of criminals, there was just one occupied room at the end of a long hallway. Through the observation window, I saw it for the first time in person. The photographs hadn't captured the sheer presence of the thing. It sat on the concrete floor in the corner, knees drawn up, massive arms wrapped around its legs. The smell coming through the ventilation system was earthy, musky, but not unpleasant, like a forest after rain. As I watched, it lifted its head and looked directly at the observation window, directly at me, and I knew with absolute certainty that there was a thinking being behind those eyes. "I'll need a proper interrogation room," I said. "Table, 2 chairs, recording equipment, and I go in alone." "Agent Cross, that thing could snap you in half," someone protested. "It won't," I interrupted, "because it wants to talk. Look at it. That's not aggression. That's hope." 6 hours later, after extensive preparations and against the vehement objections of nearly everyone present in that underground facility, I sat across a metal table from a creature that shouldn't exist. According to everything modern science had taught us, it was even larger up close than I'd anticipated, easily 7 foot 8 inches of solid muscle and bone. Every inch of it radiated potential violence, the kind of raw physical power that could tear a human being apart without effort. Yet it was power that the creature was consciously, deliberately choosing not to use. Between us sat an old-fashioned tape recorder, the kind we used for all official interrogations, the reels turning slowly in the quiet room, preserving every word, every sound, every breath for posterity and the classified files that would be locked away from public view for decades. The room itself was sparse, deliberately so. Standard FBI interrogation setup, concrete walls painted institutional beige, harsh fluorescent lighting overhead that cast no shadows, a two-way mirror on one wall behind which I knew a dozen people were watching and recording everything through multiple cameras. The metal table between us was bolted to the floor, as were both chairs, though I suspected that if Kalin wanted to, he could tear them free like they were made of paper. The air in the room smelled of concrete dust and the creature's earthy forest scent, a smell that reminded me oddly of camping trips with my father when I was young, of pine needles and moss and clean mountain streams. I folded my hands carefully on the table and began with the same question I'd used to start at least 1,000 interrogations over my years at the Bureau. It was a simple question, one that established basic personhood and identity, one that often told you more about someone than hours of detailed questioning. Do you have a name? The creature's eyes, dark and remarkably expressive despite their alien structure, held mine for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 15 seconds by the clock on the wall. In my years at the Bureau, I'd learned that silence was a powerful weapon in any interrogation. Most people couldn't stand prolonged quiet, felt an almost physical compulsion to fill it with words, with explanations, with confessions. They would break the silence, and in breaking it, often reveal more than they intended. But this being, this impossible thing sitting across from me in a government interrogation room 200 feet beneath the Virginia soil, seemed perfectly comfortable with quiet, seemed to understand that silence could be a form of communication in itself. It didn't fidget or look away or show any of the nervous tells I'd been trained to watch for. It simply sat, absolutely still, studying me with the same intensity that I was studying it, engaged in its own form of analysis and assessment. Finally, after that long, measured pause, it opened its mouth and made a sound that was part growl, part grunt, part vocalization, shaped and modulated into something that might have been language. The sound it made was completely impossible to write phonetically with English letters, a complex series of tones and resonances that seemed to come from deep in its chest, but it was clearly intentional, clearly meant as an answer to my question. Clearly a name I'm going to have considerable difficulty pronouncing that, I said honestly, maintaining eye contact, keeping my voice level and calm. May I call you something else for the duration of our conversation? Something that my vocal cords can actually manage? The creature considered this for another long moment, its massive head tilting slightly to one side in a gesture that was remarkably human despite the alien features. Then it made a gesture with one of its enormous hands, fingers that could crush bone moving with surprising delicacy. A circle drawn in the air, then pointing deliberately to itself, to its own broad chest. I'd seen that gesture before during cross-cultural communication training at the academy. It was nearly universal across human cultures. Self-individual. You're telling me you're an individual, I said slowly, making sure I understood. A person, not just an animal, not just a specimen or a thing. Yes, I am individual. The words came out rough, heavily accented, the vocal cords clearly not designed or evolved for human speech, but forcing it anyway through what must have been tremendous effort and practice. My name is Kalin of the Swift Water Clan. I am 47 winters old. I am father, teacher, and I'm hoping not to die in this place so far from forest and family. The shock of hearing it speak actual words, however broken, went through me like electricity. You speak English. Some words, Kalin said slowly, clearly struggling with each syllable learned from listening, from watching humans for many seasons. Hard to make sounds, different throat, different tongue, but important to speak. Important you understand. Why is it important I understand? I asked, leaning forward slightly. Because my people are dying, Kalin said, and the raw emotion in those rough words was unmistakable, and we need your help. Over the next 4 hours, in halting English supplemented by gestures, drawings on paper I provided, and occasional lapses into his own language that sounded like wind through trees, Kalin told me a story that would change everything I thought I knew about the world. The Sasquatch, or Sask as they called themselves, had lived in North American forests for thousands of years. They had language, culture, oral histories passed down through generations. They had names for stars, songs for seasons, rituals for birth and death. They lived in small family clans, rarely more than 20 individuals, scattered across remote wilderness areas from Alaska to California, but they were dying. The population had crashed from thousands to perhaps 60 individuals remaining. Some clans had been reduced to a single elderly survivor who would take all their knowledge to the grave. Human expansion, logging, development, all of it had destroyed their habitat and isolated their groups beyond the point of genetic viability. Kalin's own clan, the Swift Water people, numbered only 12. 3 had died in the past 5 years. There had been no births in 7. "Why not reveal yourselves sooner?" I asked. "Why hide for so long if you needed help?" "Because humans kill what they fear," Kalin said simply. "And humans fear us very much. For 500 winters we have watched humans come to this land. First ones respected forest, respected us, told stories, left offerings, kept distance. But new humans, your people, they cut everything, kill everything, take everything. When we tried to show ourselves, to make peace, they shot at us, killed many. We learned to hide. We learned silence was survival." His words hung heavy in the interrogation room, carrying the weight of centuries of trauma, of persecution, of a people forced to become ghosts in their own homeland just to survive. I felt the crushing burden of collective guilt, not for actions I'd personally taken, but for what my species had done to his. "But you're speaking now," I said quietly. "You let yourself be captured by the National Guard. You're sitting here in this room talking to me. You're taking an enormous risk after 500 years of hiding. Why? Why now? Why trust us after everything that's happened?" Kalin was silent for a long moment, and I could see something working behind his eyes, some internal struggle or calculation. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, sadder, filled with a resignation that was painful to witness, because dying in silence is still dying. He said finally, "Better to risk everything for small chance of survival than to wait quietly for the end to come. My grandmother, she who remembers the long cold, she is 130 winters old, oldest of all our people still living. She remembers when our clans filled the forests, when children's laughter was common sound. She says we must try one last time to speak to humans, to ask for help, to share what we know about forest and living in balance before that knowledge dies with us forever. She says that remaining hidden has kept us alive, but has also doomed us, that we must choose between risking everything and losing everything. So I chose to let myself be seen. I chose to let myself be captured. I chose to sit in this room with you and hope that somewhere in humanity there is still compassion for those who are different." "What you're describing," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotions roiling inside me. "This isn't just an ecological tragedy or the loss of an interesting species. If what you're telling me is true, and I believe it is, you're not an animal species in any meaningful sense. You're people, a civilization, a culture facing complete extinction." "Yes," Kalin said, and there was something like profound relief in his rough, strained voice, like he'd been waiting his entire life for someone to understand this simple truth. People. That is exactly right word. We are people. Different from you in body, different in culture, different in how we live and think, but people nonetheless. We think about past and worry about future. We feel joy and sorrow and love for our children. We mourn our dead and honor our ancestors. We tell stories and sing songs and wonder about meaning of stars above us. We are people. And we are dying, and we are asking for help from the only other people on this continent who have the power to give it. And we are terrified that even now, even after speaking, even after showing ourselves, you will not listen. That you will see us as things to study or threats to eliminate, rather than people who deserve to live." I sat back, my mind racing. This was so far beyond anything in my training, my experience, my understanding of the world. But one thing was clear. If Kalin was telling the truth, and every instinct I had said he was, then this wasn't a law enforcement matter, or even a scientific curiosity. This was a genocide in slow motion, and I was possibly the only person who could stop it. "I need you to tell me everything," I said. "Your history, your culture, your population numbers, everything. And I need your permission to share this with people who can help." Kalin looked at me with those two human eyes. "Will they listen?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I promise you I'll make them try." The next 72 hours were an absolute blur of constant briefings, heated arguments, and increasingly tense negotiations with military personnel who saw Kalin as a potential threat to national security, and scientific personnel who saw him as an unprecedented research opportunity rather than a person with rights. The debates went in circles, with some advocating for immediate dissection to understand his biology, others wanting to track him back to his clan and capture more specimens for study, still others arguing we should simply release him and pretend none of this had happened. Dr. Martinez became a crucial ally, using her scientific credibility to argue that living study was far more valuable than autopsy. Colonel Hendricks also came around, a man who'd served in Bosnia and Somalia and recognized ethnic cleansing when he saw it, even if the ethnicity in question wasn't strictly human in origin. The turning point came on the fourth day when Dr. Foster arrived at the facility, a senior advisor to the president on matters of national security and intelligence, with clearance levels that exceeded everyone else in the building. She was a woman in her 60s, with steel-grey hair cut short, sharp eyes that had witnessed too much human ugliness, and still somehow maintained hope and a reputation for making decisions that others would spend months debating. She listened to portions of the recorded interrogations, her face unreadable, reviewed all the documentation we'd compiled, the linguistic analysis, the cultural observations, the population estimates. Then she insisted on meeting Kalin herself, alone, except for me as translator and witness. I was present in that room when they met, sitting to the side, while these two representatives of different species sized each other up across that same metal table. Dr. Foster, despite her decades in government service and her exposure to classified secrets that would terrify ordinary citizens, seemed momentarily overwhelmed by the reality of sitting face to face with a creature from legend. She was silent for a long, measured moment, just studying Kalin with those sharp, analytical eyes that had evaluated threats and opportunities across the globe. Then, instead of the questions about security or biology or threat assessment that I'd expected, she asked something that caught both Kalin and me completely off guard. "What would you teach us?" she asked directly. "If we help your people survive, if we use our power and resources to protect you, what wisdom do you offer in return? What do you know that we don't?" Kalin was quiet, clearly considering the question carefully, understanding that his answer might determine the fate of his entire species. His massive fingers drummed once on the table in a gesture so human it was startling. Finally, after perhaps 30 seconds of thought, he spoke in his halting, heavily accented English. "We would teach you to listen to forest," he said slowly, "to understand that when trees die in great numbers, animals die also. When animals die, eventually you die too. Everything connected like roots beneath ground. You cannot see connections, but they are there. Humans think they are separate from nature, think they can destroy forest and still survive, think they can take without giving back. But you are part of forest, same as us, same as deer, same as salmon in streams. What harms forest harms you." He paused, gathering his thoughts, clearly struggling to express complex ideas in a language his throat was never designed to speak. "World is changing," he continued. "We see it in weather patterns, in animals migrating differently, in trees growing in wrong places. We see it and animals see it and trees themselves see it. Humans see it too, but many do not want to believe because believing means changing how you live. We can teach you how to live with changing world instead of fighting it, how to be part of forest instead of enemy of forest, how to take only what you need and give back, so there is always enough for tomorrow's children. Dr. Foster was silent for a long time. Finally, she turned to the Department of Defense representatives present. Gentlemen, I'll be recommending to the President that we classify this entire situation under a new category of protected status. These individuals and their people will be designated as indigenous persons with full human rights. Protections under international law. The territories they occupy will be designated as protected wildlife corridors with additional security provisions. One of the suits started to object. Dr. Foster, with respect, that's a decision far above. I'm aware, she cut him off, which is why I'll be meeting with the President tomorrow morning to make the case personally. In the meantime, these individuals are under federal protection. Anyone who harms them will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Are we clear? She turned to me. Agent Cross, you'll be the primary liaison between the Sask people and the federal government. Congratulations, you just became the first human ambassador to a non-human intelligence. Don't screw it up. I looked at Kaylin, who looked back at me with an expression that might have been hope I'll do my best. I said, 3 decades have passed since that September night in 1992, when a frightened Sasquatch knelt before National Guard troops and chose to trust humanity one final time. The world knows about the Sask now, though it took time. The story broke publicly in 1994 after 2 careful years of diplomatic groundwork, of preparing the public consciousness, of establishing legal frameworks and protections before the revelation could cause panic or violence. And there was panic at first, predictable fear and denial. People claimed it was a government hoax, that the footage and evidence were fabricated. Religious groups struggled with theological implications. Scientists initially refused to accept what they couldn't fit into existing evolutionary models. But slowly, gradually, acceptance spread as more evidence became undeniable, as more Sask chose to reveal themselves, as understanding replaced fear. The Swift Water Preserve was established in 1995, 10,000 square miles of protected old-growth forest in the Cascade Mountains, designated as sovereign territory under federal protection. Other preserves followed in quick succession across Canada, throughout the Pacific Northwest, in remote mountainous regions where scattered clans had survived in isolation for generations. The population has stabilized at around 200 individuals currently documented, with perhaps another 50 existing in territories so remote we haven't confirmed contact yet. It's nowhere near enough for long-term genetic viability, according to the biologists, but it's significantly better than the 60 we feared we were down to in 1992, better than the extinction that seemed inevitable before Kaylin took his gamble. Sask scientists, yes, they have scientists now, younger generation members who have learned human knowledge systems and methodologies while carefully maintaining their own traditional wisdom and ways of knowing, are working closely with human biologists on conservation genetics programs. They're exploring everything from carefully managed breeding programs to potential use of genetic technologies to increase diversity, though the elders remain cautious about anything that might fundamentally change what it means to be Sask. Kaylin himself died in 2019 at the age of 117 years, an age that would have been impossible to reach in the wild, with his people's declining numbers and increasing stresses. I was there in the hospital room when he passed, a room that had been specially modified to accommodate his enormous size, with a reinforced bed and ceiling height adjusted. He was surrounded by clan members who'd traveled from across the continent, by human friends and colleagues who'd worked with him over the decades, by the hybrid community of cultural liaisons and conservationists and researchers who have slowly formed at the interface between our two species. His breathing had grown shallow over the previous week, his great strength finally fading, but he remained lucid and aware until nearly the end. His last words to me, spoken in English that had become far more fluent over the years, but still carried that distinctive accent, were simple and profound. "You kept promise, Daniel," he said, his massive hand squeezing mine with a gentleness that belied its power. "You showed humans can choose compassion over fear. You proved my gamble was correct. Thank you for giving my people future." The grief I felt at his passing was as intense as any I'd experienced for human friends or family members, a recognition that species didn't matter when it came to the capacity for friendship and love. As for me, I'm 66 years old now. I retired from the FBI in 2013, but I've never really stopped working with the Sask people. I serve on the board of the Human Sask Council, help mediate disputes, advocate for expanded protections. The revelation Kaylin shared with me that night, the thing that was so disturbing it was classified at the highest levels. It wasn't about humanity being evil or doomed. It was simpler and more profound than that. Kaylin told me that the Sask had a saying passed down through countless generations. The measure of a people is not in what they can destroy, but in what they choose to protect. For thousands of years, watching humanity spread across the globe, the Sask believed we had failed that measure. We chose destruction over protection, conquest over coexistence, short-term gain over long-term sustainability. They watched us drive species to extinction, wage wars over resources, poison our own water and air in pursuit of profit. But Kaylin gambled that humanity could change, that we could look at something fundamentally other than ourselves and choose to protect it rather than destroy it. That we could hear wisdom from a non-human intelligence and actually listen, the terrifying part. We almost didn't. We came within hours of dissecting Kaylin, within minutes of a military confrontation that would have ended with massacred Sask and traumatized soldiers. We were that close to proving Kaylin's gamble was wrong, to confirming that humanity would always choose violence over understanding. What saved us wasn't superior morality or evolved consciousness, it was individual choices. Dr. Martinez fighting for scientific integrity, Colonel Hendricks choosing to trust my judgment, Dr. Foster seeing people instead of specimens, me believing Kaylin's story and fighting to protect him. Kaylin's revelation was this: humanity's greatest danger is not that we're inherently evil, but that we're capable of both tremendous compassion and tremendous cruelty. And the difference between the two is nothing more than choice. Individual choice repeated across millions of people, either creating a world of destruction or a world of coexistence. We're still making those choices every day. The Sask population is stable but fragile. Climate change is real and accelerating. The pressures on their habitat continue. There are still people who want to exploit them, study them invasively, or simply deny they exist, because acknowledging them would require uncomfortable changes to how we live. But there are also people, more people every year, who choose differently, who see the Sask as teachers, as neighbors, as fellow travelers on this planet, who understand that their survival and ours are intertwined. I'm 66 years old and I think about that classified transcript every day. Not because of what Kaylin revealed about humanity's nature, but because of what our response revealed about our potential. We were given a choice between fear and hope, between violence and compassion, between denying uncomfortable truths and rising to meet them. And for once, barely, we chose right. The question Kaylin left me with, the question I'll die still pondering, is whether we can keep choosing right, whether that night in September 1992 was an aberration or a turning point. whether humanity can truly evolve beyond our worst instincts. I don't know the answer, but I know that somewhere in the Cascade forests, young Sask are learning to speak both their ancestral language and English. I know that human and Sask children are growing up aware of each other, curious about each other, seeing each other as part of the same world rather than threats to be eliminated, and I know that Kaylin's gamble, however terrifying, was worth taking. That's the truth I needed to tell before I die. Not that humanity is doomed, but that we're always just a choice away from either salvation or damnation, and that sometimes, if we're very lucky and very brave, we choose salvation. The Sask are still here, still watching us, still hoping we'll keep choosing wisely. So am I.